economic collapse in the 19th and 21st centuries. The Bank of Ireland, where the Irish Parliament sat until 1800, when scared of the 98 Rising, it voted itself out of existence and merged us with the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom was a common market. The precedent was set for failed Irish governments joining common markets. The oligarchy and the landed gentry of the United Kingdom had a monopoly of political power and food production, and they kept food prices high by restricting imports. However, Britain was short of corn, whereas Ireland had an abundance, so the Irish landlords had a bonanza. The bonanza didn't trickle down to the peasants, of course, who grew the corn on small little plots which they rented yearly at rack rents, which were linked to the price of food. What food they could buy had to be supplemented by potatoes. The Maynooth College was given to the Catholic Church by the government in the early 1790s because they were afraid clerical students would become revolutionaries on the continent. The church stayed bought. Bishop Lanigan could refer to Father Murphy of 98 as the feces of the church. This is Daniel O'Connell, who represents the Catholic merchant class, originally smugglers and illicit traders with their Jacobite cousins on the continent, and now on their trajectory following emancipation towards becoming the regnant oligarchy of the 26 counties in 1921. This free trade sign represents the fact that the British didn't repeal the Union, they repealed the Corn Laws. Irish economy collapsed, landlords went bankrupt, price of Irish corn worthless, peasants couldn't buy food, and simultaneously the potatoes went rotten. To spare the landlords from bankruptcy, the government set up the NAMA of its time, the Encumbered Estates Court in Henrietta Street, bought the estates from the landlords and gave them enough to keep them going for the rest of their lives. Debt forgiveness for the rich. This is a letter in the Irish Times some time back from a man who, in Tralee, now, after he pays his mortgage, having lost his job, is unable to feed his children. This letter is vintage 1847. This here is a bread riot in Germany in 1847 because there were huge floods in the continent and famines and failures of harvest. The Irish surplus food was exported there because we were producing £40 million worth of food every year, but it was being exported to the places where people could afford to pay for it. So we really had no famine. We actually had plenty of food in the country. The merchant classes had an absolute bonanza exporting food. The next picture is a picture of the seaboard of Galway. The merchant class now bought the depopulated encumbered estates cheap from the Henrietta Street NAMA and exported live cattle in steamships, which could operate to very strict schedules, unlike sailing vessels. The obsolete sailing vessels were crudely converted for the notorious emigrant trade on the North Atlantic. The Galway sugar crisis of 1974. In December 1904, Britain ran out of sugar because of EU import restrictions. Irish distributors who were obliged by law to ensure domestic supply drove the entire supply across the border and made a fortune. We had a famine in Galway, which is 15 miles from the sugar factory. This is the Cavan orphanage fire, where the bishop expressed his happiness while blaming the fire brigade that the young orphans went straight to heaven because they hadn't been corrupted by the world. This is a picture of Cleomenes, the king of Sparta. The Spartans began to suffer defeats because they refused to innovate like all oligarchies. The people who defeated them freed the slaves. The slave owners were the citizen soldiers of Sparta, and they went bankrupt. Bankruptcy excluded them from military service, and the army began to wither away. Cleomenes decided that he would force through a burning of all mortgages. The army recovered. Unfortunately, Cleomenes was killed, and his reforms were reversed. Sparta became a theme park. This is Stalin on political reform. Nancy Astor asked him, when will you stop shooting people? And he said, undesirable classes do not eliminate themselves. The lesson being, you cannot expect political reform from politicians. This is the Irish state coach that Hutton built. He asked a fella to give him a Latin motto to put on the stagecoach, on the door of his own coach. And the guy told him a good motto would be quid rides, which means who dares to laugh. It also spells quid rides. This is Leinster House. Our state has a carriage as laughable as Hutton's because one of the four wheels is missing. The wheel that's missing is people power, the power of the people to call referendums and legislate themselves. We have executive, judiciary and legislature, but we have no people power. This is the ballot box. This is the popular referendum. The only way that we can possibly get call the shots on the political class, call the political shots on the economy, is to actually be able to vote them down ourselves. They're terrified of it. This is the theme park we will become if we don't reform. Think of the two collapses. In the 19th century, we joined a common market. 40 years later, we had an economic collapse. We had debt forgiveness for the rich. emigration, starvation for the poor. In this 21st century, we joined the common market, we had a boom, we had a collapse, we've had really wonderful flat debt forgiveness for the rich. What's going to happen to the poor? Think of the man in Tralee. That's the big question for all of you. The only way you can do that, there is no way to start political reform except to force through a people's referendum. Anybody here is interested in political reform, there's only one item on that agenda. That should be the restoration of the people's referendum. It's been missing since 1927. The Free State cancelled it after Kevin Higgins was shot. They suspended it. When De Valera passed his 1937 constitution, he abolished it altogether. What you have nowadays is a politician's referendum where you're asked to rubber stamp something that politicians have already decided upon. Think of the David Norris election. The people want David Norris, but there's no way they can have him unless the politicians say so. They're not really people's elections at all. They're phony things, those. Thank you.